Void Miner, Breaking the Line, Part 3, Chapter 21, Breakout Burn. The Dust Widow surged forward, shaking like a wounded animal coming out of hibernation. Engines screamed, metal strained. Warning lights flared across Ark's console in a chorus of protest, but she moved. By all the cold gods of the belt, she moved. Ark kept both hands locked on the controls, knuckles white, eyes fixed on the trajectory plot scrolling across the cracked nav display. The exit corridor from Ashfall Hollow wasn't designed for speed. The tunnel twisted at sharp angles, with debris floats and rock shards suspended in slow drifts throughout the dark. Even at low burn, any miscalculation here meant one thing: collision, total loss, vacuum, death. Iona's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Structural integrity at 42%. Forward inertial dampeners at 71% efficiency. Recommend controlled thrusts. Arg gritted his teeth. No time for controlled. He rammed the throttle forward another 8%. The Widow jolted, her starboard stabilizers rattling loud enough to make his fillings buzz. The first turn came fast. Too fast. Arg twisted the yoke hard, dipping the Widow's nose and scraping along the tunnel wall. Sparks flared outside the cockpit glass. Rel, strapped into the co-pilot seat, clung to his harness with both hands. Are you trying to kill us? Working on the opposite, Arg barked back. Another turn. Another roll. The Widow skimmed through the narrow corridor like a drunk knife fighter stumbling through a bar brawl. Every bolt in the ship screamed, but somehow she held. They burst out of the tunnel mouth like a bullet, straight into the wider asteroid field beyond, and straight into Helix's weighted net. Iona's threat alarms went wild. Multiple contacts at 150 clicks and closing. 8 drone interceptors vectoring in fast. Arg didn't hesitate. He slammed a new heading into the thruster banks, diving low, skimming along the surface of the nearest asteroid. The rock loomed large, spinning slow, its surface jagged and cratered from centuries of micro-impacts. Arg stayed tight to it, using the mass to scatter the Widow's heat signature. Iona called out another warning. Helix drones adjusting pursuit vectors. Lock-on protocols initializing. Of course they are, Arg muttered. He snapped the Widow into a sharp lateral roll, using a sudden burst from the portside thrusters to shove them sideways, ducking behind another floating rock. The G-forces hit hard. Arg felt his ribs compress. Vision narrowed, but he kept the yoke steady. From the corner of his eyes, he saw Rel, struggling to keep breathing. They weren't built for this. Not yet. Too much time on stations. Not enough time in the real void. But they didn't complain, didn't panic. Arg gave him the silent treatment for that. The first drone came in fast, seeking, needle-shaped, moving with the cold precision only corporate killware could manage. Arg rolled the Widow again, diving toward a debris cluster. A near-miss warning shrieked across the console. A thin pulse laser burst scorched past the aft hull, clipping one of the Widow's external sensor arrays. Iona's voice cut in. Damage to rear sensor grid, signal degradation at 62%. Patch it later, Arg snapped. Fitting maneuvering profile Delta 9. Program received. He flipped hard into the climbing spiral, burning thrusters in a tight corkscrew pattern to throw off the drone's targeting algorithms. For a few heartbeats, it worked. The drone overshot, shooting past them in a straight line vector. Arg reversed burn, kicked the Widow into a snap turn, and dove into the shadow of a nearby asteroid. More drone contacts swarmed in from different vectors. 2, 3, 4 on their scopes now. No time for stealth anymore. They were lit up like a flare in the dark. But Arg still had one last card to play. "Rel," he barked. "Rear avionics locker, green canister, marked Ashfall Special. Bring it here." Rel scrambled to unstrap and fought their way aft. Seconds later, they returned, dragging a small, dented launch canister with faded warning labels all over it. They dropped it into the deck beside Arg's chair. "What the hell is this?" Arg grinned, feral and sharp. "A parting gift from the Hollow." Inside the canister, a cluster of old but still functional mining charges. Short fuse. Wide area EMP burst. Not military grade, but nasty enough to fry sensor nets inside a small radius. Arg slammed the arming sequence and keyed it into the Windows external launcher systems. "Get ready for a blackout," he said. Iona chimed in. "EMP detonation will disable external communications and primary sensor feed for 22 seconds. Confirmed deployment." "Confirm," Arg growled. He waited until the drones were almost on them, scanning pings tightening. Lock alerts screaming. Then, "Fire!" The charge launched from the Widow's belly hardpoint, spinning in a lazy arc towards the closest drone cluster. Half a second later, the world went white. The EMP pulse hit like a hammer. Lights flared. Systems blinked out. For one terrible moment, the Widow went blind. Then, slowly, the backup grid came online. Minimal power, minimal control, but just enough. Arg threw the ship into an emergency burn, pushing all remaining engine output into the forward thrusts. The Widow shot forward, streaking through the disabled drone formation. By the time the Helix's killware rebooted, Arg was already gone, breaking through the outer edge of the net, out into the open belt space, breathing hard, alive, again. 10 minutes later, the Widow coasted quiet. Low burn, running dark again. Arg let go of the controls and sagged back in his chair, lungs burning. The adrenaline crash hit hard. Sweat poured from every pore. His hand shook. Behind him, Rel slumped in their seat, face paled, knuckles white, but still there, still breathing. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Rel let out a shaky laugh. "That was absolutely insane." Arg cracked into a tired smile. "Welcome to my life." Iona's voice cut in, clearer now as the EMP echo faded. "Helix drone net recalibrating. Pursuit unlikely until secondary units deploy." Arg nodded. "Good." He keyed in a new vector, taking them away from the last known Helix patrol grids. Not towards any station, not yet. Just away. Into deeper belt space. Out into the black. Running again. But not defeated. Never that. Chapter 22. Hard Choices. The Dust Widow drifted. Her engine cycled low and slow, barely enough output to keep her from tumbling uncontrolled through the belt's soft gravity wells. Inside, the air was thick with heat and recycled sweat. The smell of burnt insulation still lingered from the overloads. Arg sat at the center console, half slouched in the pilot's chair, his eyes bloodshot and sunken from fatigue. His fingers idly tapping against the console casing, half restlessness, half habit, keeping himself awake. The aftershock of the EMP jump still rattled through the ship's systems. Not all of the Widow's circuits had survived the pulse clean. Some sensors were still dead. Communications flickered. Thruster calibration was off by at least 4 degrees. He didn't have the parts or the power reserves to fix most of it. Not out here. Not now. But at least they weren't dead. Yet. Across the cabin, Rel sat cross-legged on the floor, back against the wall, holding a cold pack to the side of their head. Somewhere during the blackout burn, they'd slammed into the side bulkhead hard enough to leave a nasty bruise along their temple. Still conscious, still alert, but quieter now. Arg watched him for a while, letting the silence stretch. Finally, he spoke. "You should get some rest." Rel snorted, a dry, bitter sound. "Like you're going to sleep anytime soon." "Wasn't talking about me." They pulled the cold pack away and gave him a tired look. "So what's your plan, Captain?" Arg let the title roll off his shoulder without argument. Felt strange, but fitting, maybe. He rubbed a hand across his face. "The plan," he said slowly, "was to get clear of the drones, which we did. Now we find some place quiet, fix what we can, figure out where the hell to go next." Rel tilted his head. "And after that?" Arg's jaws tightened. "That depends on you." Rel blinked. "Me?" Arg stood, crossing to the port side panel. He keyed in a diagnostic sweep on the remaining long-range antenna array, praying at least one link still worked. As data scrolled sluggishly across the screen, he kept talking. "You dragged me into this," he said. "Your data theft, your escape, your choice to run into my path." Rel didn't argue, didn't deny it. Arg continued. "Now, Helix isn't just hunting you, they're hunting me too. I burned 3 emergency evasion profiles on this run alone, fried half my engine grid, took EMP damage on half my systems." He turned to face them fully now. "I've been running from a lot of things in my life, Rel. But this?" He jabbed a thumb toward the flickering sensor display, where faint traces of Helix drone patterns still showed at the edge of long-range detection. "This is different. Helix doesn't forget. They don't forgive. You and I both know that." Rel stayed quiet, eyes lowered. Arg stepped closer, voice low, steady. "This doesn't end with me dropping you at the next hab station. Doesn't end with us laying low for a while. Not anymore." He let the words settle. Weighty. Final. Finally, Rel lifted their gaze. Something shifted in their expression. Less panic now. More calculation. Resolve. Maybe even guilt. "I know," they said softly. A beat passed. Then, "I didn't mean for this to land on you. I thought, if I got the data out, if I could just disappear." They trailed off. Arg shook his head. "Nothing disappears out here. Not for long." Rel exhaled, then sat up straighter. "I have a contact," they said suddenly. "Off-grid. Old Belt activist group. Used to run interference on corporate survey teams a few years back. Last I heard, they were holed up near Saria's transfer station, operating under a low-band pirate relay. Might still be friendly." Arg's brows furrowed. "You're suggesting we take this mess and hand it off to some half-dead belt resistance group?" Rel shrugged. "Helix wants me for the data I'm carrying. They want you because you broke their net. If we sit out here waiting, they'll just keep coming. The only way this ends is if we make it too costly for them to keep chasing." Arg stared at him. Let the idea settle in his gut like a stone. It went against every survival instinct he'd built over the last 9 years. Stay small, stay quiet, don't get involved, don't pick sides. But now the fight had come to him whether he wanted it or not. And this felt like a crossroads. For a long moment, Arg said nothing. Just watched the static-filled readouts drift across his monitors. Out in the belt, empty space stretched for millions of clicks in every direction. Cold, silent, indifferent. But somewhere out here, Helix was already moving, already recalibrating, already hunting. Finally, he stood, rolled his shoulders, and cracked a tired, bitter smile. "Plot a course for Ceres," he said. "We're done running." Rel grinned back, tired but alive. "I thought you'd say that." Arg turned back to the console, hands steady now, voice low. "Iona, fire up the engines." "Engines online," the AI said, her voice still strained but carrying a hint of something sharper. The Widow rumbled beneath them, weak, hurt, but still flying, still fighting. Arg keyed in the heading, punched the thrusters, and together they vanished into the dark, toward whatever waited next. Chapter 23. Ceres Shadows. The Dust Widow emerged from the dust line at the outer edge of the Ceres transfer orbit, riding low and silent. Arg throttled back to bare minimum thrusts. No transponder, no active beacon. Just a cold rock of a ship coasting in under the radar. On the nav screen, the hulking mass of Ceres transfer station loomed ahead, half refitted, half rotting. A relic of belt commerce that never quite died. It hung at the Lagrange tether point like some industrial tumor, wrapped in mismatched docking arms and broken cargo spindles. Solar arrays dangled at odd angles. Hull patches from micrometeorite strikes looked decades old. Thruster scars marked where desperate captains had burned too hard coming in. If Helix stationed at Helios had been clean, corporate, and surgical, Ceres transfer was the opposite. Dirty, chaotic, unregulated. Which, for Arg right now, was exactly what he needed. Arg adjusted the Widow's drift, pulling her into a long, lazy arc that would carry them into the station's dark side, away from the main comm grid. The station didn't care much about non-declared arrivals, as long as you didn't cause a collision. He'd used that fact more than once in his early belt days. The station's civilian flight control barely functioned on a good week. As long as you weren't broadcasting's weapons lock or hot engines, they probably wouldn't even notice you slipping in. Probably. Arg's stomach still stayed tight. He hated relying on probably. In the co-pilot seat, Rel sat hunched over a data pad, scanning through whatever back-channel comms they still had. The data link to the Widow's systems wasn't fully stable after the EMP hit, but Rel had a knack for coaxing broken tech to cooperate. "We've got a few low-frequency pirate bands lighting up," they said. "Some still active, some just background static. There's one node pinging with encryption markers I recognize could be resistance." Arg didn't look away from the controls. "Could also be a trap." "Welcome to the belt." He couldn't argue that. 10 minutes later, Arg guided the Widow toward a forgotten maintenance drift dock on the station's unlit equatorial ring. No beacon, no guidance grid. Just a cold, open mouth with enough room for one ship. Maybe. The landing struts groaned as the Widow sat down. The docking clamps didn't engage, probably rusted solid years ago. Didn't matter. Arg killed the engines, locked down power output, and switched the ship to full silent mode. Only life support and minimal environmental controls stayed online. "Iona," he said quietly. "Local scan sweep, full passive, flag any proximity spikes." "Understood," she replied. Her voice sounded steadier now, more herself. Arg stood and grabbed his sidearm from the storage rack. A battered old .45 coil gun. Not military grade, but it packed enough of a punch for close quarters trouble. He checked the mag, loaded a fresh charge cell, and holstered it at his hip. Rel watched him. "You're going armed?" Arg gave him a look. "We're about to walk into one of the dirtiest black market hubs in the belt. Of course I'm going armed." He nodded. tightened the straps on their boots, pulled a small shock baton from their pack. Nothing fancy, but it'd work in a pinch. Together, they headed for the airlock. The station interior was worse than Arg remembered. The maintenance sector smelled like hydraulic fluid, mildew, and stale grease. The lighting flickered overhead. Half the glow panels cracked or burned out entirely. Loose cables hung from the ceiling like jungle vines. The deck plating felt uneven underfoot, patch-welded and sagging in places. No security protocols, no customs. Just the occasional half-mast figure lurking near sealed bulkheads, bartering for scraps or running backroom repairs on scavenged drone parts. It felt like the underside of the belt had gathered here to rot. Perfect cover. Ark moved fast, keeping his eyes low, but his peripheral vision sharp. Old instinct. You didn't make eye contact in places like this unless you wanted to start something. Behind him, Rel kept pace. Quiet. Focused. They walked 2 levels down through a forgotten service corridor, past flickering vendor stalls and makeshift air scrubber stations. At a junction marked with faded hazard paint, Rel finally stopped. "This is it," they said. They pulled out a small signal booster from their jacket, no bigger than a deck of cards, and flicked it on. A low-frequency ping broadcast from the device, coded, scrambled, hidden below the standard comm noise. They waited. 10 seconds. 15. Then, a response. Short, compressed. Just 4 words. "Come to sub-level 12. Arg exhaled slowly. "Well," he said, "either that's your friends, or someone pretending to be." Rel smirked. "Only one way to find out." They descended 4 more decks via a freight lift that rattled with every floor. The lights inside barely worked. At sub-level 12, the doors groaned open onto a long, dark corridor lit only by 2 functioning ceiling strips. Ark stepped out first, scanning both ends of the hall. Nothing. But his gut twisted. Too quiet. Too empty. Places like this didn't stay this quiet unless someone wanted them that way. "Eyes up," he murmured. They moved forward. Halfway down the hall, a side door creaked open. A figure emerged, tall, broad-shouldered, face hidden beneath a grease-streaked breather mask. Old patchwork flight suit, wide stance, armed. The figure raised both hands slowly, palms out. "Relax," the stranger said, his voice gravelly but not aggressive. "If we wanted you dead, you wouldn't have made it off your ship." Ark's hand stayed near his sidearm. "Not the most assuring welcome." "Not a reassuring time," the stranger replied. He jerked a thumb towards the open door. "Inside, quick." Ark hesitated only for a second, then moved. Rel close behind. Inside the room, low light, old equipment, signal scramblers lining the walls. A small group sat around a table littered with old data pads and half-eaten ration bars. Hard faces, tired eyes. But when Rel stepped in, one woman stood immediately. Mid-40s, lean, with close-cropped gray hair and oil-streaked coveralls. Her face lit up with recognition. "Rel?" she said. Her voice cracked, full of disbelief and buried emotion. Rel smiled weakly. "Hey, Lyra." They crossed the room, clasping hands hard. Ark stayed near the door, watching, listening. The woman, Lyra, turned toward him next. "And you are?" "Arg Arston." Her eyes narrowed. Recognition flickered there, too, but for a different reason. "I heard your name over the Helix patrol chatter a few days back," she said. "They're not happy with you." Arg snorted. "Mutual feeling." Lyra grinned, small but sharp. "Good, we can use that." She turned back to her people, barking quick orders. "Get this channel locked down. Prep a burst relay. We've got incoming trouble and maybe, finally, a way to fight back." Ark's stomach tightened. The weight of it hit him fully for the first time. This wasn't just running anymore. He wasn't hiding. Not here. Not now. Whatever this was, he was in it, whether he wanted to be or not. Chapter 24. The Spark. The meeting room felt like it had been carved out of old ship bones. Bulkhead panels, mismatched from at least 4 different manufacturers. Exposed conduit ran along the ceiling, humming with barely stable power. A stale chemical smell hung in the air, recycled coolant and cheap ozone scrubbers working overtime. Arg sat at the far corner of the room, hands clasped loosely in his lap, letting the conversation swirl around him. A half-dozen members of the belt resistance moved between battered terminals, relay stations, and old folding tables covered with data pads and crumpled rations wrappers. Lyra stood at the center of it all, direct, sharp, commanding. Her voice cut through the chatter.
Helix has increased their drone presence across 3 major shipping lanes in the last 48 hours. Patrol interceptors have tripled. They're scanning every ship within 100 clicks of the blockade perimeter.
She keyed in a hollow display on the wall. A crude, flickering projection filled the room, outlining the blockade around Vega Point Station. The only station on this side of the belt still willing to buy offloaded ore without corporate clearance. Arg leaned forward, studying the map. Red markers filled the screen. Helix patrol vectors, drone flight paths, sensor net overlays. Looked like a damn spiderweb of death. His gut tightened. "This is suicide," he muttered. Lyra glanced at him. "Maybe." "Definitely," Arg corrected. Rel, seated beside him, winced but said nothing. Lyra crossed her arms.
We've been trying to crack this blockade for weeks. Freighters, couriers, smugglers, all turned back or vaporized on approach. Helix has standing orders. No unauthorized traffic gets through.
"And you think I'm going to break it with a half-burned hauler held together with patched welds and a prayer?" Arg asked, voice dry. She gave a thin smile.
Better odds than most.
The room fell quiet. All eyes drifted towards Arg. The tension thickened. Arg stood slowly, moving towards the projection. He tapped the screen near the outer marker ring. "Even if I punch through this, you're forgetting something." Lyra raised an eyebrow.
Which is?
He turned to face them all. "They're already hunting me." He pointed toward Rel. "And him. Helix won't just shoot us. They'll chase us, track us, hunt us down until there's nothing left." His voice dropped low. "They'll send more than drones next time." Silence settled over the room again. One of the younger resistance members, a kid barely out of his teens with oil-streaked hands and 2 bright eyes, spoke from the back. "Yeah, but if you pull this off, they'll break their locks on Vega Point." Another voice joined. "It'll prove they're not invincible." Lyra stepped forward, her tone quieter now, almost conspiratorial.
This isn't about you, Arg, or your cargo. It's about what happens after.
Arg frowned. "Meaning?" She keyed in a second data feed. Another map appeared, this one showing belt-wide shipping lanes. Dozens of them, most now marked with Helix control zones.
Helix is tightening everywhere, Lyra said. After the Ashfall incident, after your escape, they've gone paranoid. More checkpoints, more ship scans, random confiscations.
She leaned closer.
They're scared.
The words settled like dust in the room. Arg stayed quiet for a long beat. Then, "I didn't ask to start a war."
"No one ever does,"
Lyra said. Later, after the briefing broke up, Arg found himself alone in the corner of the maintenance bay below the ops room. The widow sat in dock, her battered frame lit by flickering work lights. Scattered teams moving around her, welding, rewiring, patching up her hull with whatever scrap the resistance had lying around. Rel worked alongside them, helping reroute power flow lines under Iona's supervision. Arg stood with one hand on the hull plating, feeling the vibration of the deck through his gloves. Old instincts stirred inside him. Memories of jury-rigging emergency burn repairs in the shadow of a dead asteroid, of bleeding knuckles, of quiet promises whispered to no one. Somewhere in the back of his mind, Tara's voice surfaced. Soft, half-remembered. "You always take the hard road, don't you?" He closed his eyes, fighting the ache that lived just beneath his ribs. Yeah, that sounded about right. Footsteps approached. Lyra again. She had a cigarette, cheap station-rolled synth, then offered him one. Ark shook his head. She took a drag. "So," she said, exhaling slowly, "you gonna help, or you gonna keep brooding against the bulkhead?" Ark snorted. "Not much of a choice anymore, is it?" Her smile was small, but genuine. "No, not really." She turned to leave, paused, then over her shoulder. "For what it's worth, we're glad you're here." Ark watched her go, then turned back to the widow. His ship. His battered, broken, beautiful ship. And somewhere out there, a blockade waiting to be broken. Helix waiting to be embarrassed. And a belt waiting for someone stupid enough to try. Arg blew out a slow breath, then moved towards the ladder well, ready to get to work. There was a fight coming, and he was done running. Chapter 25. War Paint. The Dust Widow sat in dry dock like a prize fighter with broken ribs and blood on the floor, waiting for the last round. Arg stood on the upper gantry, arms crossed, watching the controlled chaos unfold beneath him. Welders threw up showers of sparks as they cut out a damaged panel on the Widow's starboard side. Two techs from the Resistance crawled across her belly plating, bolting on jury-rigged ablative armor plates made from old mining skiff hulls. A third team worked at the aft thruster array, swapping out fried coolant lines and rerouting exhaust flow for higher burst capacity. The entire bay buzzed with noise, tools, shouted orders, the deep thrum of emergency generators laboring under the load. Rel stood near the open portside maintenance hatch, half submerged in a panel cavity, hands deep in the Widow's secondary power couplings. Their sleeves were rolled up to the elbows, forearms streaked with grease and carbon soot. They'd been working non-stop for the last 5 hours. Arg pulled a grim smile. For someone who started this adventure as a terrified data thief, Rel adapted fast. Too fast, maybe. That worried him. People who learn to cope with danger this quickly usually burned out even faster. Iona's voice crackled through the overhead speakers, grainy but functional. "Primary reactor stress is holding at 68%. Coolant flow restored. Secondary comms array now operating at 62% efficiency." Arg keyed his wrist mic. "Override safety protocols for the reactor surge buffers. I want the Widow able to overburn for at least 40 seconds if we need it." Iona hesitated. "Warning, sustained burn at that level risks thermal cascade and structural failure." "I know. Do it anyway." "Confirmed." The Widow hummed louder as the power regulators adjusted. Another risk added to the stack. Arg made a mental note. If he survived this run, he owed Iona a full systems overhaul and about 1,000 apologies. If he survived. Lyra approached from the far side of the bay, carrying a data slate loaded with final flight profiles. Her eyes were rimmed red from lack of sleep, her voice sharp but low. "We've set up 3 decoy fighters to leave the station just before you launch," she said, handing Arg the slate. "Old ore haulers with boosted EM signatures should draw drone attention for about 60 seconds. Arg flipped through the data. The decoys were thin bait at best. Helix wasn't stupid. But maybe, just maybe, they'd hesitate long enough for him to slip through. Rel popped out from the maintenance hatch, wiped sweat from their forehead with the back of their hand. "We've retuned the Widow's EM profile," they reported, breathlessly. "Reduced her signature to about 18% below normal hull threshold.
It'll buy us a little ghost time on the initial scans.
Not bad, Ark said.
Also added a few flare bursts to the launcher bay, Rel added, grinning faintly. Low-yield plasma pops, fake weapons fire. If we timed them right, we might fake a weapons discharge and trigger Helix's counter-targeting protocols.
Ark blanked, then chuckled. You're learning.
Fast teacher,
Rel said with a tired shrug. Ark set the slate down and rolled his shoulders, working out the knots that had settled in the last 24 hours. Every part of his body felt like it had been run over by a transport hauler. Didn't matter. He moved towards the widow's nose section, running a slow hand across the faded hull markings. Paint chips flaked off under his touch. The old lettering still barely readable. Dust Widow. Arg reached into a nearby tool crate, grabbed a half-empty can of matte black paint, and popped the cap. With slow, deliberate strokes, he painted 2 thick stripes across the hull just below the cockpit viewport. Crude. Uneven, but visible. War paint. Rel watched from the deck. What's that for? Arg capped the paint and tossed the can aside. For luck, Rel smirked. You're kidding, right? Nope. Arg moved back towards the boarding ramp. We'll need all of it. 2 hours later, with the Widow sealed and systems at 80% readiness, Arg stood in the cockpit staring at the nav screen. Lyra's voice came through the comm. Decoys are launching now. You're on the clock. The long-range scan flared with movement as 3 battered cargo ships powered up and burned hard towards open belt space, broadcasting wild, noisy transponder codes. Almost immediately, Helix's blockade net started to shift. Drones peeled off, moving to intercept. Arg's heart kicked hard in his chest. This was it. The window. Iona's voice chimed in, calm but edged with static. Flight path vector uploaded. Burn vector primed. Final check. Do you wish to proceed? Arg's hand hovered over the throttle. He looked at Rel. He sat in a co-pilot seat, strapped in, breathing fast, eyes wide, but steady. Waiting. Trusting him. Arg let out one last slow breath. Then he grinned, sharp and tired and reckless. Hell yes, he said, and shoved the throttle forward. The Widow roared to life, and together they charged toward the blockade, toward whatever waited beyond, toward war. Chapter 26, Running the Gauntlet. The Dust Widow screamed through the void. Her overclocked engines burned hotter than they were ever designed for, throwing off turbulent ion trails that lit the vacuum behind her like a comet tail. Inside the cockpit, warning klaxons howled in cycles. Red and yellow status lights strobed across the console. Arg gritted his teeth, one hand on the throttle, the other dancing over the flight controls, making constant micro-adjustments to pitch, yaw, and velocity vector. His pulse hammered in his ears, keeping time with every jolt of acceleration. The Widow wasn't built for this kind of maneuvering. Not for slalom runs through a corporate interdiction field. Not for outrunning military-grade pursuit drones. And definitely not for frontal assaults on blockade lines. But none of that mattered now, because they were committed. Because turning back wasn't an option. 2 incoming on our 12, Rel shouted from the co-pilot seat, eyes flickering across the tactical display. Interceptors moving fast. Heat-seeking. I see them, Arg barked back. Iona's voice crackled through the ship's speakers, strained but determined. Impact window in 14 seconds. Recommend evasive vector Delta 7. Arg didn't hesitate. He slammed the Widow into a sharp roll and dropped her nose into a steep dive, cutting across the predicted intercept path by sheer force of engine output. The inertial dampeners whined in protest. G-forces punched them both deep into their seats. Behind them, 2 Helix interceptors overshot, their lock-on systems struggling to recalibrate as the Widow vanished below their scanning horizon. Flare pattern, now! Arg shouted. Rel hit the launch trigger. A burst of high-intensity plasma flares fired from the Widow's ventral bay. Short, bright, and messy. On the sensor board, both interceptors blinked red as their targeting systems scrambled to track real from false echoes. Arg grinned. Brief, sharp. That bought us maybe 10 seconds.
More than we had,
Rel coughed. Iona chimed in again.
Multiple pursuit vectors reacquiring, drone formation closing at 37,000 kilometers and dropping fast. Recommend action? Burn harder.
No kidding, Arg muttered. He jammed the throttle forward again. The Widow's engine surged. Panels bucked. A new stream of error codes cascaded across the diagnostic screen. Reactor temperature critical. Structural stress nearing failure thresholds. Life support reserves dropping. Every line of data screamed one thing. You're going to die out here. Arg ignored it, focused only on the next marker, then the next, then the next, 1 second at a time. Ahead, the blockade line grew larger in the display. A dense net of sensor drones, electronic warfare nodes, and at least 2 Helix patrol corvettes floated like wolves waiting for their first scent of blood. The distance closed too fast. Arg's hands moved on instinct. Manual override for the Widow's EM signature controls. Power diverted from non-essentials. Final burn program loaded. 1 shot. 1 window. No second chances. Iona spoke again, her voice quieter now, like she understood too.
Missile lock detected. 5 targets. Impact in 22 seconds.
Arg exhaled slowly through his nose. This is it. He flicked a glance towards Rel. Brace! Rel's knuckles whitened on their harness straps. Arg shoved the Widow into a spiraling barrel roll, kicking lateral thrusters hard to port. The ship slewed sideways through vacuum, slipping between 2 drifting sensor beacons with only meters to spare. The first missile screamed past, detonating behind them in a bright, silent blossom of light. The shock wave rattled their hull like a hammer strike. The next 2 missiles recalibrated and swung wide, coming in at a sharper angle. Arg popped the Widow's dorsal flare canisters, more decoys, more cluster for their targeters. Both missiles lost lock and veered off, spiraling uselessly into the void. The 4th and 5th missiles didn't miss. They closed fast. Too fast. Arg threw everything he had into the Widow's remaining forward burn. No subtlety, no tricks, just raw, desperate speed. 1 missile clipped their aft starboard fin. Metal sheared. Alarms screamed. Hull pressure dropped along that vector. Rel yelled as the cabin shook violently, but the ship held. The final missile detonated too far behind to do more than scorch the Widow's aft plating. Arg didn't slow. Couldn't. They were almost through. Almost. The blockade line loomed. The patrol corvettes had finally locked onto them, too late to intercept, but still able to fire. Autocannons lit up across the vacuum, streams of kinetic rounds lancing toward their path. Tracer lines filled the void like threads of silver lightning. Arg yanked the Widow into one last roll, scraping past the edge of the engagement range by meters. Rounds clipped their port side armor. A vent line ruptured. A small fire started near the aft relay panel. Iona extinguished it automatically, but more error lights lit the console like a funeral pyre. The Widow groaned under the strain. Every weld, every joint, every stressed panel in her battered frame flexed near failure. But she held. God help them both, she held. Then, just like that, they were clear. Past the blockade, out of Helix's immediate range. Space opened wide and empty ahead of them. No more target locks, no more drone pings, no more chase. At least not yet. Arg slumped back in his seat, chest heaving, vision swimming. Rel let out a ragged breath beside him. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Arg keyed the comm. Iona, report. The AI's voice came slow, glitching in places.
Structural integrity, 41%. Engine capacity, degraded. Life support, Stable for now. Recommend immediate docking for a full system overhaul.
Arg allowed himself a grim smile. We'll get there. Rel pulled off their harness, their face pale but eyes still bright with adrenaline.
We did it,
They breathed. Arg nodded. Yeah, for now. He keyed in the new course vector. Destination, Vega Point Station. Time to finish this. Chapter 27. Vega Point. The Dust Widow limped towards Vega Point Station like a wounded animal crawling home after a fight it wasn't meant to win. Arg throttled the engines back to near idle, letting the ship coast on momentum. The reactor heat levels were still flirting with catastrophic failure. Hull stress warnings lit the console like a carnival board. Half the comms arrays were fried. The nav suite was glitching every 20 seconds, but they were close now. Close enough to see the station's external lighting winking against the black of space. Vega Point hung just off the inner drift lane, a crescent-shaped cluster of old cargo modules and decommissioned habitat rings welded together over decades. It wasn't pretty, wasn't even structurally symmetrical. But to belt miners and haulers cut off by Helix blockades, Vega Point was freedom. At least for now. Arg sat back in his chair, cracking his neck and exhaling slow. His hands were still shaking, adrenaline still burning out of his system. Rel sat beside him, pale and quiet, staring at the approach vector like they couldn't quite believe they were still alive. Neither could Arg. He keyed the internal comm. Iona? Status? Her voice came back fragmented but holding.
Structural integrity, 38%. Primary coolant, venting at 12% loss rate. Reactor core, within critical margins, but unstable for sustained thrusts.
In English?
We need dock time soon.
Arg grimaced. Copy. He toggled to external comms, switched to Vega Point's short-range traffic channel. Vega Point Traffic Control, this is Dust Widow, Class B hauler, requesting emergency dock. No weapons hot, minimal power. Repeat, we are running critical systems failure. The reply came faster than expected. A gruff voice, thick with belter accent. Dust Widow, you're cleared for berth Delta 7. Be advised, no tow capability. If you can't land yourself, you die outside. Arg cracked a bitter smile. Wouldn't expect anything else. He cut the channel and guided the Widow into a slow burn towards the station's lower ring. The docking clamps at Delta 7 looked barely functional, worn and rusted like the rest of the station. Didn't matter. He was putting her down here even if she skidded in sideways. With a final sputtering cough from her engines, the Dust Widow settled into the cradle, locking into place with a metallic groan that sounded far too much like exhaustion. Arg powered down the reactors, sealed the fuel lines, and let out a long breath. They'd made it. Somehow. 15 minutes later, with atmosphere equalized, Arg and Rel stomped off the Widow's ramp onto the docking bay. The air smelled like ozone, metal, and sweat. The deck was stained with old fuel spills and dust that no one had bothered to clean for years. A small crowd had already gathered. Dock workers, old hauler crews, free miners, people wearing patchwork flight suits and carrying the kind of tension that come from years of corporate harassment. They stood in loose formation near the bulkhead doors, staring. Some crossed their arms, some kept their hands in their tool belts or sidearms. Most just watched in silence. Arg's gut twisted. This wasn't the angry, who the hell are you kind of stare. This was something else. Rel shifted uneasily beside him. Why do I feel like a circus act? Arg didn't answer. From the front of a group, a man stepped forward. Tall, dark-skinned, shaved head, heavy with muscles, and wearing an old engineering vest covered in unit patches from half a dozen outpost stations. His voice, when he spoke, carried through the bay like gravel dragging over steel. You're the one who ran the line? Not a question. A statement. Arg said nothing at first, just gave a slow, cautious nod. The man's face broke into a grin. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't warm. It was impressed. A few people behind him let out low whistles. Someone even clapped. Just once, but it echoed. Arg shifted on his feet. I wasn't trying to make a statement, he said gruffly. The man laughed, a deep, harsh bark. Doesn't matter, you did it. Rowe cleared his throat. We're just looking for repairs, not this? More people had gathered now. Word spread fast on stations like this. Ark felt the weight of their attention. Felt it like a pressure building at the base of his skull. All these people looking at him like he'd done something heroic, like he was a symbol, like he was something he definitely wasn't. A leader, a fighter, hell, even a survivor on some days. Just a miner in a broken ship who got lucky. But it didn't matter what he thought. Not anymore. Perception had already taken root. Later that night, after securing emergency repair authorizations and paying with the last of his liquid credits, Arg sat in a corner seat at one of Vega Point's dive bars. The place was little more than a room full of mismatched chairs, cracked glassware, and a low drone of recycled air scrubbers buzzing overhead. Rel nursed a synthetic whiskey 2 tables over, chatting quietly with a pair of off-duty hauler techs. Across the room, Ark could still hear snippets of conversation. Whispers. Retelling. He broke the line. Widow burned right through the middle of the blockade. Helix Patrol couldn't stop him. Maybe things are finally shifting. Arg closed his eyes, ran a hand down his face. The spark was lit. He wasn't sure anyone could put it out now. Certainly not him, not anymore. In the far corner of the bar, a small terminal screen flickered to life. A news feed from a Helix-controlled network scrolled across the screen. Helix Corps today issued a formal condemnation of unauthorized flight activity in restricted belt sectors, citing reckless and criminal behavior endangering corporate assets and personnel. Arg opened his eyes, stared at the screen. The words felt like a distant thunder before a coming storm. Because deep down, he knew this wasn't over. This was just the beginning. Chapter 28. Corporate Retaliation. Arg sat alone in the Dust Widow's cockpit. The ship hummed faintly around him. Quiet background noise from life support systems barely holding together. The smell of burnt wiring and scorched metal still lingered in the air. Dockside maintenance crews were scheduled to start patching her structural damage in the morning. But for now, she sat broken and breathing shallow, like a wounded animal. Arg leaned back in the pilot's chair, staring at the blank console screen in front of him. His reflection caught in the dark glass, older than he remembered. More lines under the eyes. More gray along the jawline stubble. He rubbed a hand over his face and reached for the external cam module bolted to the control panel. The same one he'd used for years now. The same cheap rig he used for outrun updates and EVA repair tutorials. Now, he wasn't sure what this was, but people would want to know. The channel had been quiet for too long. The belt was buzzing, and like it or not, his name was now tangled in the middle of it. Arg powered up the camera. Green light blinked. He sat forward, cleared his throat. Let the silence stretch for a few seconds longer than necessary. Then, in a low, steady voice, Name's Arg Arston, 45 years old, solo miner, pilot of the Dust Widow. For those of you following the channel, you've probably already seen the news feed. You've heard the comm traffic, the rumors, the blockade at Vega Point, the Helix patrols, the pursuit. Yeah, I broke through. Not because I'm a hero. Not because I was trying to make some big statement. I was just trying to survive like the rest of us out here. He paused, exhaled slow, searched for the right words, felt the weight of the belt pressing in on him through the hull. I don't know Helix a damn thing. I mine that ore. Hold it with my own hands. Repaired this ship alone in the dark more times than I can count. When they slammed that blockade down, they didn't just cut me off. They cut off every miner, every hauler, every family scraping by out here. They drew a line, and they made it real clear where they stand. I didn't ask to be part of this fight, but when they pushed, I pushed back. That's all this was. I'm not a soldier. I'm not a leader. I'm just a man trying to make a living in a place most people wouldn't even look at twice. If they want to make me a target for that, then fine. Let 'em come. He reached over, killed the recording. Sat there for a few long seconds, heart pounding, mouth dry. He almost deleted the file. Almost. But then he uploaded it. No edits, no music bed, no dramatic cuts. Just raw, shaky, real. A straight shot across the bow. A miner's voice, thrown straight into the void. By the time Ark stepped off the Widow and into the docking concourse, the ripple effects had already started. Comms from other stations lighting up. Chat boards flooded. Independent hauler feeds picking it up and rebroadcasting. Miners from across the belt sharing the video with the same title. Void Miner, break the line. Ark shoved his hands deep into his jacket pockets and kept his head down. Too late to take it back now. And judging by the angry spike of corporate chatter on the public boards, Helix had seen it too. Later that night, sitting at a corner table in the same dim station bar, Ark watched the feed screen overhead. A Helix Corps spokesperson stood stiffly in front of a sterile blue backdrop. Her voice was cold, scripted, sanitized. The individual known as Arg Arston has violated multiple corporate security mandates, endangered Helix personnel, and distributed inflammatory propaganda intended to incite unrest among the civilian populations in the belt. Helix reserves the right to pursue all legal and enforcement actions necessary to restore order and protect corporate interests in the region. Ark set down his glass, didn't even blink, because deep down, he'd already expected this. The words were always the same, just new paint on the same old threats. But something in the air had shifted. For the first time in years, people were watching, and waiting, and choosing sides. The storm was coming, and now his name was attached to it. Chapter 29. The Corporate Hammer. The warning came before dawn cycle. Arg was still asleep, if you could call it that, on the Widow's narrow bunk, boots still on, when the station's wide alert klaxon started wailing. The sound cut through steel walls and thin insulation like a bone saw. He bolted upright. For half a second, his mind scrambled for possibilities. Fire? Hull breach? Another blackout? No, this wasn't any of those. This was something worse. Station defense alert. Helix inbound. Arg sprinted up the access ladder 2 rungs at a time, nearly slamming his head on the ceiling bulkhead as he emerged into the Widow's cockpit. The external sensors were still glitchy, but the passive suite caught enough to confirm what his gut already knew. A Helix cruiser. Medium-class enforcement vessel. Designation HCS Veil Cutter, hanging less than 1,000 clicks off Vega Point's outer perimeter. Arg swore under his breath. Cruisers didn't patrol belt lanes this deep, not unless they had orders. Not unless they meant to make an example. Iona's damaged voice crackled from the comm panel. New contact confirmed. Helix corporate security asset, armament loadout, heavy. Rill appeared in the hatchway, hair a mess, face pale and sleep-starved. I heard the alarms, they said, voice tight. Arg nodded grimly. Yeah, get your boots on. This is going south. By the time Arg and Rel reached the outer concourse of Vega Point, the entire docking level was in motion. Crowds clustered around bulkhead doors. Miners, engineers, freelancers. Some were shouting. Some were grabbing tools and makeshift weapons. Station security teams, more militia than formal defense force, scrambled to set up portable barrier fields at the main airlock approach. Lyra stood near the security checkpoint, issuing orders with clipped urgency. Her voice cut across the chaos.
Get the civvies off the main deck, reroute power to blast shutters on levels 2 through 4, and somebody get me a comm link to that Helix captain before they decide to vent us from orbit.
She caught sight of Arg approaching and waved him over.
You picked a hell of a time to become famous,
she said without looking up from her datapad. Arg snorted. Don't remind me. A projection screen flickered on the concourse wall, patching in the open broadcast feed coming from the Veil Cutter. The screen showed the corporate captain standing on her bridge, straight-backed, steel gray uniform, expression cold enough to freeze steel. Her voice played across the station-wide channel.
This is Captain Riven Holt of the Helix Corporate Security Division. Vega Point Station is now designated a restricted zone due to violations of corporate trade law, anti-piracy mandates, and unlawful interference with Helix property.
The words dripped with corporate legalese, but the meaning underneath was clear. They were here to make a point. Captain Holt continued.
You are hereby ordered to surrender the fugitive vessel Dust Widow and her operator Arg Arston into Helix custody immediately. Failure to comply will result in escalation.
A murmur rolled through the crowd. Arg felt every set of eyes shift towards him. Even Rel stiffened beside him. He crossed his arms. Well, that answers that. Lyra turned toward him.
You're not handing yourself over.
It wasn't a question. No, Arg said flatly. She nodded once.
Good.
She turned back to her team.
Prep defense grids. Activate every rail launcher we've got.
One of the techs near the security station paled. But our turrets can't punch through a cruiser's shielding. Lyra's jaw tensed.
They don't need to. We're not stopping them. Just buying time.
In the minutes that followed, Vega Point braced for impact. Lockdown protocols swept across the station. Shutters sealed over observation windows. Airlock controls went dark except for local override points. Station medics set up triage units behind the secondary bulkheads. Arg stood at the observation deck, staring through the armored viewport at the cold, dark shape of the Veil Cutter hovering outside. He could see the glow of its charged railguns. Watched the slow, deliberate roll of its attitude thrusters as it positioned itself for a firing angle. Rel approached quietly.
Do we even stand a chance? They asked,
voice low. Arg thought for a long moment, then said, Nope. Rel blinked. Arg turned towards them. But that doesn't mean we roll over. As the countdown clock on the defense grid display began to tick downward, 3 minutes until Helix's final ultimatum expired. Arg pulled out his old recording rig. Same setup as always. Same angle. Same voice. One more video for the channel. He hit record. Arg Arston here. I'm on Vega Point Station. Some of you are already hearing the news. Helix brought a cruiser out here. For one miner. Let that sink in. A 1 billion credit warship for one broken down hauler pilot and one empty ship. They don't care about the ore. They don't care about trade laws. They care about control. About making an example. And if they're willing to bring this kind of firepower against one station, what do you think happens next? This isn't about me anymore. It's about all of us. Stay sharp. Stay free. Void Miner. Out. He uploaded the clip. No edits. No filters. No second takes. As the first warning shots from the Veil Cutter lit up the station's outer shields in a burst of blue-white plasma, Arg clipped the recorder back onto his belt, then headed for the nearest defense line. It was going to be a long night. Chapter 30. Stand or Fall. The first Helix strike hit harder than Arg expected. The Veil Cutter opened with a broadside plasma lance, meant for orbital bombardment, not station combat. The outer shielding arrays over Vega Point's dorsal ring flared and buckled, absorbing most of the blast, but sending a ripple through the entire station structure. Lights flickered, conduits burst. Atmospheric pressure alarms screamed in half a dozen sections. Arg staggered against a bulkhead, catching himself before he hit the deck. The walls groaned with the strain. Lyra's voice bellowed over the station comms.
All personnel brace for secondary impact. Seal all non-reinforced sections. If you're not on defense detail, get to shelter.
Arg pushed off the wall and sprinted toward the main defense grid control panel, where Rel and 3 station techs were already huddled, trying to keep what was left of the shielding operational. "Status!" Arg barked. Rel's hands flew across the console keys, sweat dripping from their forehead.
Shields at 30% and dropping. We've lost 2 capacitor nodes and the main power relay on Ring 2 is out. We can't take another hit like that.
Another explosion rattled the floor beneath their feet. One of the techs cursed. Another slammed a fist against a dead console. Arg grabbed the comm panel and patched into station-wide. "This is Arg Arston. If you're holding a wrench, a welder, or a pulse rifle, get to the lines. If you're not, find something to reinforce. We hold as long as we can." He didn't wait for a reply. Didn't need one. Everyone already knew what was coming. Back on the Dust Widow, the internal system struggled under partial power, but the communications rig was still barely alive. Arg climbed into the cockpit just long enough to check the external uplink. When the screen booted, he froze. Thousands of notifications. His Void Miner channel feed was exploding in real time. Comments, messages, private comms. More than he'd seen in years of uploading. The entire belt was watching. Some comments were short, raw bursts of support. "Stay strong, brother. Give 'em hell, Dust Widow. We're with you, Belt. Don't bow." Others were more direct. 3 rigs leaving Ceres airspace now, ETA 6 hours. Hauler crews forming up near Vesta. Got shields and scrap armor. "This blockade ends. Count me in." Arg scrolled faster. Names he recognized. Old mining crews. Free hauler convoys. Even a few deep-range freelancers he hadn't heard from in years. People who normally didn't involve themselves in fights like this. People risking everything to get here. All because of that video. All because he spoke out. Arg sat back in his chair, stunned. For a long second, he didn't know whether to laugh or swear. Probably both. Iona's voice, weak but still there, cut through the noise.
Inbound private comms now exceeding 9,000 channels. Network congestion imminent.
Arg keyed the external comm again and recorded something short. Just a voice-only burst, sent across open frequencies. "To anyone inbound, we're still standing, but not for long. If you're coming, hurry." He hit send. And for the first time in weeks, let himself hope, even if just a little. On the outer docking ring, Lyra stood behind a makeshift defense wall, a pulse rifle slung over her shoulder. Her second in command, Juno, jogged up from the far corridor. "Helix ground units prepping boarding shuttles," Juno said, breathless.
How long?
5 minutes, maybe less. Lyra's jaw tightened. Then she caught sight of Arg jogging toward the barricade. She nodded toward him.
Thought you might have bolted.
Arg shook his head. "Not this time."
Good, she said. You got a lot of fans turning in right now, she added, smirking despite herself. Whole damn belt seems to think you're the spark for something bigger.
Arg exhaled. "I didn't light it."
Doesn't matter, you're the one holding the match.
They both turned as the Veil Cutter landed its boarding shuttles. 4 atmospheric-capable dropships peeled off the cruiser's underbelly, burning hard toward the station's airlock bays. The first wave of Helix security force was coming. Rill arrived, panting, holding a modified pulse scatter gun they must have pulled from the emergency lockers. They took position beside Arg. The station alarm screamed one final time. Bulkhead doors sealed, magnetic clamps locked. The atmosphere seemed to thicken as adrenaline surged in every body lining the barricade. Ark tightened his grip on the rifle Lyra tossed him. "This is gonna hurt," he muttered. Rel grinned, a shaky, nervous grin, but it was there. "Yeah, but let's make 'em regret it." The first Helix boarding shuttle landed onto the external airlock. The breach alarms triggered, and Vega Point prepared to stand or fall. Chapter 31. Breach. The first breach came with a sound like the station itself had torn in half, a deep metallic thunk as the Helix boarding clamps locked onto airlock delta. Then, the unmistakable shriek of hull-cutting torches igniting. Sparks exploded through the seams, the outer bulkhead glowing red-hot. Dock workers and civilian volunteers scrambled back, dragging portable barricades and flipping cargo crates into place for makeshift cover. Lyra crouched near the front line, rifle against her shoulder, eyes fixed on the glowing breach point. Arg took cover 2 meters behind her, his own rifle shaking slightly in his grip. His heart was pounding. The air felt too thin. Somewhere deep inside, instinct told him this was different than anything before. Mining accidents, hull leaks, reactor failures, those were predictable, mechanical. This was personal. The airlock door blew inward with a pressurized blast. Shrapnel cut across the concourse like a wave of razors. The first defender, a young kid from cargo maintenance, caught a piece of metal straight through the throat. Blood sprayed across the deck. They collapsed, clutching at their neck, kicking reflexively until the light went out in their eyes. Rel shouted from behind the cover of a crate, "Medic! Medic!" But there was no time. The Helix team poured through the breach, black-armored suits, full-face visors, compact subsonic rail carbines slung against their chests. They moved with practiced efficiency, clearing corners, sweeping cover positions. Their rounds weren't warning shots. They fired to kill. Arg squeezed the trigger. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. His first burst stitched across the lead Helix trooper's chest plate, sparking uselessly off the hardened ceramic armor. The trooper barely flinched, returned fire with brutal speed. Rounds tore chunks out of the crate Arg ducked behind. A shard of polyalloy splintered off and gashed across his left forearm. Blood welled immediately. Arg swore, ripped a pressure patch from his belt pouch, and slapped it over the wound without breaking rhythm. Lyra shouted over the station-wide comm, "Focus fire on the flanks. Keep them boxed in. Don't let them push to the central ring." Juno and 2 others heaved a portable autocannon into place behind a stack of mining equipment. They braced it on a tripod and opened fire. The concussive thump, thump, thump of kinetic slugs filled the air. One Helix trooper took a round square in his visor. His helmet exploded like brittle glass, spraying blood and skull fragments across the bulkhead behind him. Another went down screaming as rounds chewed through his thigh and pelvis, severing arteries. His team tried to drag him back through the breach point, but a well-placed grenade from one of Lyra's defenders ended their attempt. The corridor turned into a red mist. Arg scrambled to a new position behind a flipped coolant tank. Rel slid in beside him, breathing hard, skin pale. "You good?" they asked, shouting over the gunfire. "Not remotely," Arg growled. "You?" "Not remotely," Rel echoed, giving a shaky grin. For a second, that was enough. The Helix team regrouped behind their breach point. The survivors deployed smoke canisters and repositioned into cover formations. One of them, probably their squad leader, keyed into external comms. A cold, modulated voice broadcast over open channels. "Vega Point Station, this is your final chance. Surrender our Garston, power down all resistance systems, and submit to detainment. Failure to comply will escalate force to lethal clearance of all personnel." Arg splat blood from a split lip, grabbed the nearest comm panel, punched the transmit key. "Yeah? Screw your ultimatums. If you want me, you come take me." He killed the channel before they could reply. The next wave hit harder. Helix deployed kinetic breachers, heavy troopers in exo-rig suits designed for close-quarters assault. One of them barreled straight through a steel barricade like it was made of cardboard, swinging a hydraulic battering ram. A station tech was caught mid-sprint, flattened against the wall with a sickening crunch of bone and armor. Arg turned and emptied half a magazine into the breacher's side. The rounds punched through weak points under the arm joint, and the big man went down twitching. Rill grabbed Arg by the collar, yanking him down as yet another burst of fire shredded the space where he'd been standing. By the 20-minute mark, the floor was slick with blood. Smoke choked the air. Bodies, Helix and Vega Point defenders both, lay scattered across the concourse. But, somehow, the line held. For now. Lyra dropped into cover beside Arg, reloading with shaky hands. "Helix is regrouping," she panted. "Probably setting up for a full push to the power core." Arg nodded grimly. "That's where we make our stand." Across the comm channels, Arg's Void Miner feed was still live, still streaming, still broadcasting raw, unfiltered footage from the station's internal cams. Somewhere out there, thousands, maybe millions were watching. Miners, haulers, freeborners, stationers, the whole damn belt. Arg wiped blood off his face, checked his rifle one more time, and braced for the next wave. Chapter 32. The Pushback. The next wave should have broken them. Helix forces regrouped with brutal efficiency. More boarding shuttles detached from the Veil Cutter, streaking toward Vega Point's secondary airlocks. The station's defense grid was down to auxiliary batteries. The shield matrix had collapsed completely. Breached compartments vented slowly into space. Emergency bulkheads sealing with barely enough time to prevent full decompression. The station's lower rings, already damaged from the Veil Cutter's opening salvo, were flickering with brownouts. Lyra stood at the command post overlooking the inner concourse, her face pale with exhaustion, her uniform streaked with soot and blood. Juno shouted from the defense console, "Another Helix squad inbound at docking ring 2. They're pushing straight for the reactor control section." Lyra slammed her fist onto the console frame. "We're out of fallback positions." Then the long-range scanners chimed. A new contact, then another, then 6 more. Juno froze, eyes wide. Boss?" "What?" Lyra snapped. Juno just pointed at the console. "Look!" Lyra turned towards the screen. For half a second she didn't believe what she was seeing. Faint signatures, small craft, freighters, mining rigs, retrofit haulers, dozens of them, dropping out of the drift lanes, burning hard toward Vega Point at unsafe approach speeds. Their transponder IDs lit up like a firework display on the defense board. Independent, non-corporate belt origin, every single one. All of them broadcasting the same wine-band call sign. "Void Miner Alliance inbound." Arg had just finished clearing his rifle for the 5th time when his comms cracked to life. Iona's voice, glitchy but steady. "New inbound fleet. Multiple civilian-class vessels. Non-Helix signature. ETA 20 seconds. Arg scrambled up from cover, ran for the observation viewport. The black of space lit up with engine flares. Freighter after freighter burned straight toward the Veil Cutter's perimeter. Old ore haulers armed with bolt-on coil guns. Retired survey ships modified with anti-boarding turrets. Jury-rigged rock toppers carrying scrap armor and angry pilots. And leading them, a battered Class C prospector barge painted in unregistered gray and yellow hazard stripes. Its pilot broadcast a single voice, only burst across open comms. A voice Arg recognized instantly. Old, gruff, full of gravel and hate. "Took you long enough to make trouble, Arston." Arg's Herc skipped a beat. "Garrett," he breathed. The old miner laughed into the channel. "Couldn't let you have all the fun, kid." The ad hoc fleet didn't wait for permission. They opened fire. A dozen independent ships unleashed a volley of kinetic rounds, plasma bursts, and improvised flak charges at the Veil Cutter's outer shields. It wasn't clean. It wasn't coordinated. But it was enough. The Helix cruiser's shields flared under the sudden chaotic assault. Point defense cannons scrambled to track the incoming swarm. Several belt ships took hits instantly. 2 broke apart under return fire, venting debris and flame, but the rest kept coming. The Veil Cutter's gunners couldn't cover every vector, not at once. One mining rig, a slow, ugly ore tug out of Vesta called the Iron Widow, plowed straight into the Veil Cutter's upper deck, ramming with suicidal force. The explosion lit the black with a bloom of white-hot plasma. The Veil Cutter's shield's banks collapsed on its port side. And just like that, Vega Point wasn't alone anymore. Inside the station, Helix troops faltered. Comms were breaking apart. Orders from their cruiser went silent. Squad leaders started shouting conflicting commands. Some Helix units fell back towards their shuttle docks. Others dug in, confused and cut off. Arg didn't wait. He grabbed his rifle, vaulted over the barricade, and charged. The fighting turned ugly, up close, personal. Pulse rounds punched holes through walls and people alike. Station defenders, miners, engineers, mechanics fought with whatever they could grab. Wrenches, welding torch, rail pistols, blunt force impacts cracked helmets. Airlocks became meat grinders. One Helix trooper tried to push past Arg near the secondary coolant pipe junction. Arg tackled him into the wall, drove an elbow into his visor, and emptied half a magazine point blank. Blood sprayed across the deck plating. No time for regret. No time for second guesses. This was survival, pure and simple. By the time the Veil Cutter's remaining engines burned out and the crippled cruiser drifted sideways under its own momentum, the station comms erupted with cheers. What was left of the Helix boarding team surrendered. Some just dropped their weapons and laid flat on their deck, hands behind their heads. Others barricaded themselves in maintenance base, waiting for extractions that wouldn't come. The belt ships pulled back into loose formation around Vega Point, standing guard. A perimeter, a shield wall. And for the first time in days, the station felt quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after violence. Heavy, thick, uncertain. Arg stood at the center of the concourse, panting, covered in dust, smoke, and dried blood. Rel staggered over, their arm in a makeshift sling. They gave him a crooked grin. "You alive?" "Barely." They both laughed. Weak, broken laughter. But it was real. Lyra approached from the far end of the corridor. Her face was a mess of bruises and dried blood, but she was still standing. She nodded towards Arg. "Guess you're not just a miner anymore." Arg looked at the remains of the Helix squads being marched into containment. Then up at the cracked observation window, where the distant, burning wreckage of the Veil Cutter drifted among the stars. And he knew. The real war was only just beginning. Chapter 33. Fallout. The smell of ozone and burned metal still hung in the air. Station medics moved from body to body along the concourse floor, tagging the dead, stabilizing the wounded. Plasma scorches stained the bulkheads. Pools of blood mixed with hydraulic fluid under broken light fixtures. Arg sat on a collapsed crate near docking ring 2, his hand shaking from adrenaline dump and blood loss. His right shoulder throbbed from where he'd taken a glancing shot during the last Helix push. Rel sat next to him, their arm now properly splinted, wincing with every shallow breath. Across the concourse, a group of miners, many of them strangers to Vega Point, helped drag debris away from the main airlocks. The ad hoc belt fleet remained in loose orbit. 15 ships, some too damaged to fly, some barely holding pressure. But they stayed. Even as Helix reinforcements failed to show. Even as the belt comm networks buzzed with static and panicked chatter. No one left. Not yet. Arg keyed into the Void Miner channel console one more time. The view count on his last 2 vids, Break the Line and Stand or Fall, was astronomical. Hundreds of thousands of views across the belt, tens of thousands of comments. The feed was still going. Live footage of the wounded being moved, volunteers rebuilding bulkheads, Miners checked each other for injuries, people helping strangers. Some of the comments rolling in were short bursts of rage. Corporate murderers! Never again! Helix doesn't own the belt. Others were quieter, sadder. Names of the dead being posted by family and friends. Already people were calling the defense of Vega Point something else. The turning point. Arg leaned back against the wall, stared up at the cracked ceiling, wondering how the hell it had come to this. Later that evening, when station power stabilized and comms came back fully online, the broadcast arrived. Direct. Unencrypted. From Helix Corporate High Command. The feed played across every major station in the belt simultaneously. Arg stood with Lyra, Rel, and half the remaining station crew in the main concourse as the screen overhead flickered on. A tall Helix executive appeared on screen, smooth-voiced, calm, wearing a slate gray corporate suit with silver insignia on his collar. His name appeared at the bottom of the broadcast. Director Enoch Velan, Helix Corporate Operations, Belt Division. Velan spoke without hesitation, without emotion. This is a formal statement from Helix Corporation regarding the illegal actions taken at Vega Point Station. A rogue civilian population led by known fugitive Arg Arston engaged in armed aggression against Helix security assets, resulting in loss of corporate personnel and property. In accordance with Corporate Security Directive 17-4A, and under emergency authorization granted by Helix Interstellar Holdings, the Belt region is now under active corporate enforcement status. Arg felt the weight of those words hit him like a punch to the chest. The crowd around him went silent. Director Velan continued, effective immediately, all independent stations, outposts, and mining operations within the belt are subject to enforcement compliance protocols. Non-compliance will be treated as open insurrection. Helix security fleets are mobilizing. Deployment orders are active. Arg Arston is hereby classified as an enemy combatant. Any entity providing aid or shelter to him will be considered hostile to corporate governance. Further resistance will be met with decisive force. The screen cut to black. For a long time, no one spoke. Then Lyra turned to Arg, her face pale and drawn. Well, she said, looks like you started a war. Arg swallowed hard. Didn't speak. Couldn't. In the distance, from somewhere deeper in the station, a lone miner started to cheer. Then another. Then another. A ripple of defiance spread through the battered survivors and station crew. People raised their fists, banged on steel bulkheads, started chanting, Belt strong! Belt strong! Belt strong! The noise swelled, filling the concourse. Arg stood in the middle of it, exhausted, bleeding, haunted, and yet still standing. He keyed his personal comm, eyes narrowing as he stared at the empty space where the Veil Kelder once hung. One quiet promise to himself. If they want war, they just found one. Epilogue. The Declaration. Arg sat on a battered crate in the main concourse of Vega Point. Around him, miners, engineers, and station crew. Faces streaked with grime, sweat, and blood, gathered close, their eyes burning with something fierce. The station's emergency lights cast a red glow, flickering over the scene like a war drum. Arg keyed his camera. The familiar red recording lights blinked on. He took a breath, steadying his voice. This is Arg Arston, speaking from Vega Point Station. Helix Corporate Security has declared us enemies, declared war. But let me be clear. If you declare war on the free people of the Belt, then the free people of the Belt declare war on you. The camera swung slowly, capturing faces around him, hands clenched, nodding in grim agreement. Lyra, her jaw set hard, gave a small, fierce smile. Rel raised a fist. Others joined in, voices rising. Belt strong, belt free. Arg looked back at the camera, eyes steady. They came for one man, but they awakened 1,000. And we'll fight. Not just for survival, but freedom. He reached forward and tapped the recorder off. The feed went dark, but the message was clear. Arg rose, shoulders squared. He turned to the crowd and nodded. Then with one last glance to the flickering station lights, he said quietly, Void Miner, out. The end of part 3 of Void Miner, Break the Line.